Hey guys, today I'll be presenting a research proposal I have comparing an L2 learner's abilities to overcome native phonotactic constraints and to differentiate phonemes. So I will be working with native Japanese speakers who have received a formal education in English for about 6 years, but have never received any specific education on phonotactic constraints or differentiating non-native phonemes. So I will be providing perceptual instruction in the experiment to help them attain a better degree of differentiation of non-native phonemes or better be able to overcome their phonotactic constraints. And I think that they'll be better able to overcome these constraints because they are more deeply ingrained, the phonemes are more deeply ingrained in an individual's mind than phonotactic constraints are. So, I'd like to go over some objectives. I'd like to give you guys a bit of a background on this topic. I'd like to discuss the pertinent research to this topic. I'd like to describe the methods of my proposal, and I'd like to explore some potential conclusions which might be reached if this research were conducted. So there are many parts in a word, and some of them are divisible, and these are called segmentals. And they can include things like phonemes, or syllables, or prefixes. But here we'll specifically be focusing on phonemes, which are the individual sounds in a word, and syllables, which are the consonants and vowels put together. We will also touch on suprasegmentals, which are the indivisible parts of a word, such as pitch, or juncture, or stress, and we will specifically focus on pitch. So some pertinent research in pitch instruction was conducted by Wang and Perechion, and they studied the teaching of pitch to English speakers who did not speak Chinese. They taught Chinese pitches to them using English synthetic syllables at 3 of the 4 different Chinese pitches, and they gave them a pretest to see how they could perceive it before, then provided perceptual training, and after they provided that for about 9 weeks, they gave them the same pretest as a post-test, and they were much more successful in the discerning of different pitches. So then Al-Jasser conducted a study in 2008 on English phonotactics for Arabic speakers. He gave them different synthetic words which had an English word within them and asked the Arabic speakers to identify these words in a pretest. Then he also used some that had Arabic phonotactic constraints, and they were more successful in determining those, finding the English word inside, than the English phonotactic constraints. Then he taught them specifically about English phonotactic constraints explicitly, and then he conducted the same test as a post-test, and they were much, much more successful in the words which used English phonotactic constraints to identify the English word within. So another interesting study was conducted by Finn and Hudson Cam about segmenting phonotactically illegal words. Basically, they made about 20 different phonotactically illegal words in English, and they strung them together randomly in an audio file that ran for between 30 minutes and 2 hours, depending on the length of the experiment being conducted. And they asked the individuals to identify the 20 words within when they were done, but there was no spacing in these audio files, so they had to segment them based on hearing them different in different sequences and saying this is the word that was heard. And they failed to do this because Finn and Hudson determined that spacing is very important in learning new phonotactic constraints. When they did allow spacing in the audio file, then the individuals were much better at determining the words, even though they were phonotactically illegal in English. So the two research articles which I will really be focusing on are by Bradlow, differentiating R and L, and by Ito and Armin, analyzing Japanese phonotactic constraints. So in English, we have two phonemes, R and L. In Japanese, they have one intermediate phoneme between these, and this is the voiced alveolar flap, D. And so that symbol there says ru, and that's how it's pronounced. And it's in between ru and lu. It's ru. So Japanese people have a lot of trouble differentiating this. And Bradlow studied using perception to help improve both the future perception of a Japanese speaker for these two phonemes and also the production. He gave them perception tasks of minimal pair differentiation. Uh, then Ito and Armin analyzed the phonotactic constraints of Japanese, and there's one in particular which I will be focusing on, and that is the syllable fu. And fu uh, uses the bilabial non-sibilant fricative, but it is preceded by ha and he and proceeded by he and ho in the syllabary. So it's important to note that Japanese people have a whole lot of trouble pronouncing who because it's not native to their language. They can say fu, but not who. And so this fu is often identified as an F by English speakers, and it can cause a lot of confusion in Japanese people speaking English. So now I'm going to go into the methods for my research proposal, which are derived from Bradlow's experiment, seen on the previous slide. And so the stimuli will be 50 L minimal word pairs and 50 fu minimal word pairs. And all of the words which are used will follow English phonotactic constraints, whether they're synthetic or natural words. Now there will be 4 groups under study. There will be a control group, which will receive a pretest and a post-test of minimal pair identification, and they will also be recorded saying these minimal pairs for future analysis by English speakers, native English speakers. And then there will be phoneme-trained participants, which will receive a pretest just like the control group, but then they will receive perceptual phoneme training essentially like the test, but they will be informed when they are incorrect or correct. They'll receive about 45 of these sessions between the pretest and the post-test, and then they should improve their phoneme pronunciation, that is R and L, on the post-test. Then there will be phonotactically trained participants, which will receive the pretest containing both R and L and fu and hu as well, but they will focus on fu and hu differentiation, and then they will take the post-test, and they should improve on differentiating fu and hu. And finally, there will be dual-trained participants, which will receive the same amount of training time, which means they will receive half of the training that the other 2 training groups will receive in their fields. And so after all of that is done and the pretest and post-test are analyzed, there will be English speakers who will be asked to analyze the participants' recordings. And so the first group of 5 American English speakers will be assigned to each participant. They will be asked to give a quality score on a scale of 1 to 7 for between the pre and post test recordings as to which one sounds better. And then 5 more American English speakers will be asked to perform the minimal pair identification tests like the participants, but they will be using the participants' recordings. So this will show how well the participants were able to produce based on the perception training they received. So some potential conclusions which might be drawn. Phonemes versus phonotactics. If one of them is more successfully taught, then this indicates that it's more plastic in the individual's mind. If dual training is less successful in single field training, then that might show that it's good to pursue one goal and then move on to the next when teaching individuals. If perception is better in scale than production in this testing, that's probably because they were taught via perception. And finally, some future applications of this could really improve the way that Teaching occurs in the classroom for pronunciation because a lot of people struggle in pronouncing foreign languages. So these are my references, and thank you all so much.